Alrighty, so what we're going to cover off today is what's going to happen come 2022 when Google and Chrome stop the utilization and collection of third-party cookies, and how we as businesses and advertisers can kind of prepare for that moving forward. But before we go into it, just a bit of an overview of who I am. So my name is Selina Gough, and I'm the head of growth at In Marketing We Trust. My key responsibilities are overseeing our paid and organic teams and ensuring that the work that we are doing, we are delivering, is working in line with our clients' business goals. Some light-hearted ones, I live in Brisbane. My 12-year-old dog is my housemate. And lastly, I do have a biological sister. Her name is Selina Gough. And before you ask, that is not her. Alrighty, so what we're going to cover off today is firstly, what are cookies? That's just a bit of a refresh and a reminder to everyone who has forgotten, I suppose. And then we'll cover off how we use them today, what it's going to look like come 2022. And then lastly, how you guys as businesses or agencies can kind of prepare for that to mitigate any impact come 2022. So what are cookies? Really simply, it's just a bit of data that gets associated with a user's web browser once they visit your website. And you can essentially collect information based on how they're interacting with your website and what they're kind of doing, for X amount of time that you actually allocate on that cookie. And I think a lot of people would be familiar with this, where since GDPR coming out a couple of years ago, it has been really front of mind where we're now having to ask permission to collect this information. And I suppose an example or a scenario of what that would look like in real world is a user visits your website, then given a unique tracking cookie, which allows you to collect information about how they've engaged with your particular website. And that information is then stored on an external tool like Google Analytics. And let's say in the scenario that they've actually converted, then given a lead profile, which allows you to look backwards at, what channels they've used, how long it's taken them, how many pages it viewed to actually convert, which will then essentially dictate your marketing activities moving forward. And there are two key types of cookies, which I want to make very clear before we go too far into it. So you got first and third, of which third party is what's actually leaving. So for first party data and cookies, it's people actually physically on your website. And even though you have external tools like Google Analytics, anything within Google Analytics is essentially yours. That is first party data that you guys can kind of use based on how they've engaged with your website. So that's not necessarily going to disappear. And, examples of that information would be, the first point there is stateful data, which is, if you're an e-commerce store and their users left items within their shopping cart, then that's information that you then own. It also helps users do autocomplete functions and form fields, how they've engaged with the website. All of that kind of information really sits within your realm, and that won't be removed. What will be removed is, or affected, is ad retargeting behavioral advertising. So based on how someone's engaged with your website, based on what type of content they viewed online, all of that information is actually utilizing third-party cookies, and that's what's really going to be affected come next year. So how we currently use them is there's three key elements. So you got audiences, you got measurement, you got reporting. So from an audience perspective, and I'm sure a lot of advertisers wouldn't necessarily think about it this way, but prospecting audiences as an advertiser, you're not using third-party cookies or anything like that. But what you are using is essentially a database that it has been collected from these platforms. And the way that these platforms collect that information predominantly is through third-party cookies. So if we're thinking about Google and how they identify affinity audience and in-market audiences and those kind of things, it really is based on what type of content that they have consumed and what they are searching for and all of those things. And that's when it is technically third-party. And that's how we can kind of tap into these platforms and utilize them moving forward. So that's how prospective audiences do use it. And then the most logical is retargeting audiences. So obviously if they go to your site, you drop a cookie and then you can remarket back to them with dynamic or relevant content moving forward. From a measurement perspective, so it does utilize it because it allows platforms and machine learning to identify when a single user, or as close as it can get, it's not perfect, but when a single user has viewed a particular website or those kind of things, and then can kind of identify how they've engaged with the site. So the easiest one would be reach versus frequency. So reach obviously is the number of people that you have reached, which is using third-party cookies. And then the machine learning will adjust the frequency based on those figures and the performance. And then from a reporting perspective, there's a lot of different types of data points that utilize third-party cookies. So, identifying what domain people have actually looked at, how many users, how often they've returned back to a website. All of this kind of information really does leverage third-party cookies for you to kind of stitch together and try to identify as close as you can who a single user is and how they've used online. So if we're thinking about next year, I want to cover off, what is happening to them and the impact that does have on audiences, measurement and reporting. So Facebook and Apple have quite a public feud where, we're with Apple coming forward with the 14.5 iOS update, which essentially is making users, which I'm sure many of us have seen, having to opt in to actually be able to track them. So we're already seeing these updates and changes happening within Apple. And what we did see when the rollout happened back in April 2021 is at the big top graph there, you can see that, 51.6% of Facebook users, mobile users were on Apple, whereas after the update, it was 14%. So what's really happening is that we have less capability of targeting these people because we don't have the visibility anymore, essentially. And it's not to say that remarketing isn't possible anymore. What it is saying is we can target Android devices, specific browser traffic. There are some people who do opt in weirdly, and you've also got some people that just haven't updated. So those are still capable to use for retargeting audiences, but I would add a little caveat to say to make sure that the audience size is large enough to actually make that feasible. But you can see the drastic change in just that alone. So Google came out with an update January 2020 where they announced that they're going to be phasing out the third-party cookies over the next couple of years. So come 2022, they will be gone. And I suppose the real concerning component of this is the reality is Safari and Firefox have already done this. This has already happened. But when you look at the market share of Chrome sitting at 66.4%, that is why this is such a big movement within our industry, because it's going to have the largest impact on us. And the reason why it's happening is, again, like I mentioned earlier, it really is about user privacy and users feeling like, you can see that 72% of users feel like they are being tracked whenever they are online. And 81% of people don't actually think that advertisers are using that information correctly to actually provide any benefit to them. And that's really the key concern here. And that's why you've got the likes of Apple, you've got Google, and you've got Safari and all other platforms trying to come up with a response for how we can reassure users that we are collecting information in a safe way. And when we think about specifically third-party cookies, so the main reason why they are leaving is because they're not transparent. So from a user perspective, you don't really see, what information is collected about yourself and how it is being utilized and shared. They're not technically people-based. So I did mention earlier that they try as close as possible to kind of stitch it together towards one human. But if you are going from browser to browser, you're using different device types, and naturally speaking, you're not seeing as one person, you're seeing as multiple people. They don't actually last super long. So they do have a deletion date, or an expiry date. So if a user deletes your cookies, or whether they all have expiry dates, so they don't actually have a lot of longevity to them. And lastly is that they're not common in the sense that they're not able to be kind of stitched together when it comes to your above line marketing. So they are really just siloed for online activities. So it does reduce the effectiveness from a marketing perspective. So retargeting audiences, if we're thinking about, the Facebook example, we do expect to see significant decreases in audience sizes because you're no longer able to really collect an audience and push that out to third-party platforms like Google or like Facebook, because it does heavily rely on cookies being utilized through the tracking pixels. Audience extensions, so that's the ability to target a certain user across multiple different websites, or multiple different publishers. So that's really, when it comes to display advertising and those kind of things. So it won't be possible, through third-party cookies, because you won't be able to say that they want to target, user A across these 5 different websites, because user A is invisible essentially moving forward. And then behavioral and demographics. So, when you do have platforms like Facebook who collect information about what you look at, what you view, like I mentioned, your interests and stuff like that, it does rely on that information. So this information will be difficult to collect that information moving forward for advertisers to use. So the validity of this data will basically become diluted. And from a measurement perspective, so, it is decreasing the capability of measurement with the third-party cookies, and it will force a lot of us to kind of move towards relying on, I suppose, like it says, they're aggregated anonymized data, which will still provide gaps when we are trying to think about attribution and consumer journeys. But it is really where we are today. And there is conversion modeling that Google's actually been doing since 2016, as you can see there. So it does rely on machine learning, where it utilizes a subset of data to kind of go, okay, well, out of 100 sessions or users, that we can view 90% of it. So we can assume out of the other 10% how they react and how they convert, and then it kind of moves forward from there. So the system has gotten a lot smarter, but from a measurement perspective, we'll become more reliant when it comes to these kind of things. And here's a really quick example of how it looks. So the blue squares there are really the observed, and when you're looking at unobserved and trying to link them together to find similar attributes when you are comparing your observed and unobserved data. And Google also has a tracking solution, which is called Privacy Sandbox, and it will really overcome these issues when it comes to performance and measurement. So, we will see the different audience types change because of Sandbox, which is moving essentially users away from very specific interests and those kind of things into a cohort level, so that it is still relevant, but it's moving away from a sniper approach to a more of a shotgun approach. And then with reporting, so technically no data is going to be lost. So when you think about Google Analytics, it's not going to be lost. But what is going to be lost is the connection between a previous user activity. So as an example, it will increase the volume of sessions because it's not going to identify when a user is new versus returning like it does today. So if I go today and I go tomorrow, it's not going to identify that I went today. So the sessions will actually increase, which will be your audience overview, which naturally has a flow-on effect to time lag. So that's really identifying how long it takes for you to convert. So again, if you can't track backwards to previous activity, then you can't really see time lag correctly. And then attribution will almost become last click, where you can't retroactively identify how you've engaged with the website and how many different channels you have. So everything will become very heavy on the last click front. And here's an example of what happened with Safari. So they released the ITP update a couple of years ago, where they shortened the cookie lifespan. And you can see here on the left that what happened was the volume of new users, you can see there is our new visitors, sorry, is 85% in comparison to all other browsers. It's sitting at 69. So like I was saying before, if you can't track when someone's returning necessarily, then there's naturally going to be a high volume of new visitors. And then you can see here as well that the counter sessions on the first day is dramatically more than essentially all other browsers, because it can't connect the other days prior to that. And then the conversion rate also saw a decrease because you're pumping so many more people through as a new visitor than you would through a returning. So naturally the data does become skewed. And here's an example from a reporting perspective, how the unobserved data can be utilized in conjunction with observed. And then that is essentially what is reported within our platforms moving forward. So when you are looking at it using Google Tag Manager, it will then, compare your modeled versus your observed data. It will then measure the performance and use machine learning to actually automate and optimize your actual campaigns. And that's kind of when you start reporting on that, the results moving forward. So Doomsday Prep, it wouldn't be a presentation without a cartoon, I suppose. So there are a combination of different solutions. If you Google any kind of research around this, there's going to be a million different options there. So I have tried to summarize them today, where a lot of businesses are moving towards the first party data collection. So if that is what's staying and remaining, that's what we need to really leverage the most. So it's not even just sending people to your website, because we obviously have seen how reporting will change with that. But it is really about, database collection is where a lot of businesses are investing today, and we'll go into a little bit later. Also, you can look at your cookie-free performance. So comparing, I guess, what you're currently running, prospecting audiences versus remarketing, it does allow you to kind of forecast what you can expect moving forward if you were to lose that capability. Geographic performance is a really big one, because we will lose the capability of, postcode targeting and those kind of things, because we can't quite connect the two anymore. So it is about identifying today what your best performing locations are. So, come next year, you know exactly how to adjust your marketing accordingly. The next one is contextual data. So understanding, contextually who your audience is. So, there are a lot of businesses that are investing in consumer profiling today that will allow you to kind of understand, from a perspective, how you can target people who are your genuine relevant audience. There are some publishers out there that will work with you, and they aren't necessarily affected as badly when it comes to the cookie side of things, to understand, who your audience is and how you can reach them. And then, kind of, I think the theme of this as well is just really investing in your prospective audiences, just to really understand, what your performance could be moving forward come next year. Alrighty, so when we think about doomsday preparation, we'll go through the different data solutions that you have access to today, and how, you can prepare your business. So like I mentioned just before, first party data is going to be the key. And when we're thinking about collecting first party data, because obviously this whole movement is about users, right? And making sure that they feel comfortable and they feel protected. So if you are going to collect first party data, you got to make sure that you're actually delivering value for it. And, there's been a lot of studies on it. And there's, a lot of companies out there that say 90% of their actual strategy is about first party. Naturally, you're going to see increases in performance. Like you can see there, 2.9% revenue uplift, and a 1.5% increase in cost savings, because you've invested so heavily in making sure that you have a relevant audience that you can target. So to how to deliver on it, the key thing is to make sure that you tailor your brand objectives. So the key takeaway on this one is to make sure that you know exactly what the business goal is and what you're trying to achieve, and you're not collecting any information that you don't need. So if all you need for targeting purposes, if you want to upload databases in Facebook, is a mobile number and a first name, last name, then that's it. There is no reason to collect anything beyond that. And making sure internally you are thinking about cost, the cost of and risk. So, with GDPR and privacy laws and stuff like that, you want to make sure that you are protecting your consumers' data and using it correctly. And then essentially having a roadmap to know that, how you're going to collect it, if you're going to collect it, how you're going to use it, and how you're going to continuously refresh it and provide value to your users, which kind of leads into the next one, which is offering value. So like I mentioned, don't collect information you're not going to utilize. Make sure that you do have consent forms in the site. So, the little banner that says, "Are you okay for me to track?" That's a perfect example of it. And then offer a value proposition. It's an exchange of goods, right? So if they're going to give you their information, you want to give them something back. So if you're going to use it, you can notify them when, if you're an e-commerce store, when the favorite item is in stock. If you want to give them a deal or coupon and they have to redeem it, if it's a loyalty program they have to sign up for, if it's a mobile app they go download. All of these are really strong examples of how you can offer something to a user in exchange for their information. And once you have that information, a lot of companies ask, like, what do you do with it? And you really want to integrate it within, your marketing and data management platforms, which will allow, the right people to analyze it to get the right information out of it. So identifying and really kind of challenging to make sure that you are targeting the right people and you are sending them the right messaging. And then once that's all kind of done, it is very much a test and learn methodology. So if you have a goal and you want to run, a concept on it, a perfect example would be customer match or similar audiences within your paid platforms. If you want to test specific ad messaging or promotions and those kind of things, you can start on a very small scale and then basically automate and really kind of pump that, provide the results are positive. And then it's a continuous process of testing and learning to make sure that, you are providing the greatest value to the users that you do have. And then lastly, it is really about, making sure that you are measuring the performance correctly. So, having a clear picture of what your KPIs are, understanding, that, you have to measure the value of those users. So, platforms in place that you could use are site-wide tagging. You can import offline conversions or use sales direct. There's obviously data imports in Google Analytics or using measurement protocols to really kind of integrate as many platforms as you can. So that way you have all the data in place for you to make those decisions moving forward. And again, using first-party data in the best and most moral way. So if you do need to build, I suppose, a business case internally, because it's not a cheap exercise to collect this information, is really the first step would be to understand the value of the data that you currently have and the value of the customers that you have today. And then testing and learning, like I said, like if you're going to use a scale process and a concept, is activating that information and then pulling that data and results out of it to really understand what additional performance that test has given you. And then having a capture and a refresh strategy behind that. So you can't keep pushing the same message or different messages to the same 10 people every single month. It is going to have to be a strategy of continuously building out your database and those kind of things through the value propositions that we spoke about earlier. Another one is Unified ID 2.0. So this is mainly for publishers. So this is Trade Desk's, I suppose, solution to the loss of cookies. So it requires users to be logged in to an online service. So it could be a website or an app. And then that allows you to kind of track people based on the content that they are viewing and those kind of things. It is a really great tool because it does rely on people signing in. So the quality of data is really high. The only limitation to it is not all users are going to be logged in when they do consume content. So that's kind of the key one on that one. You have federated learning of cohorts, which is FLUC. So this kind of comes from the privacy sandbox that we talked about earlier. So instead of identifying people by specific interests and those kind of things and what websites they use and all that kind of stuff, Google will allow us to segment our targeting based on cohorts. So again, like I mentioned, it's more of a shotgun approach to kind of group people of similar interests together, which allows to target moving forward, and it becomes less granular. And then there's server-side tagging. So this allows your website and your browser to push information from your server. So you collect everything there, and then you push it into third-party platforms like Google Analytics or Facebook and those kind of things. So from our head of analytics, Benoit, so the key benefits that he's kind of listed out here is that, the data does become yours, which is great. And it does, like I said, it allows you to store it on your side and your server. So you can communicate directly with third-party vendors. And then you can add a level of control of how you actually are using that information and data and what you are physically collecting. It also allows for, it does ensure privacy again, because if you have the right data protocols in place, then we know that you're going to use it correctly. Where the downside is that it is less transparent to users. So that's obviously an issue from a user perspective. There's not a lot of support when it comes to this. So there's not a lot of people who have successfully done this or set this up. It does require a lot of work. And it does allow businesses, unfortunately, to use this information for black hat reasons. So, if you're going to collect people's PII information, that's obviously a massive issue, but you do have the capability to do it and use it how you need to. So there are some risks to doing it. And there's also Publishable Gardens. So it's a closed ecosystem. So, in like Facebook as an example is technically a closed ecosystem. So is Google, where they collect first-party data and they sell it off. And it is good because it is authenticated data. It's high quality, and you're allowed to use it almost like it's like selling a database essentially. Unfortunately, it is increasing in rates, especially with next year coming up fast. So the price of actually getting access to this information is very high. So I suppose when we're thinking about, there's so many different ways you can start to prepare now, and there's not one solution, unfortunately. But how you guys can kind of prepare your business is to make sure that you're integrating your marketing and data management platforms. So, making sure that the data and marketing are working together, and you're relying on your data to really kind of influence your marketing activities moving forward and connecting as much as you can today. And it really is about, like I said, if you integrate everything, then you're going to pull your first party data across, and you're going to share it across multiple platforms, which will then allow you to fill in those, measurement gaps and model data, because you are sharing all of that information in the one kind of hub, which will then allow you as advertisers in the platforms to predict, I suppose, how, consumer behavior and, actual reporting on results and optimizations moving forward. Then the next step would be, from a process perspective, is that you are actually gaining genuine insights across platforms. So a key thing is there's no point in integrating platforms and data and all those kind of things if you're not actually going to gain anything from it. And it is about the entire process, from stakeholders to the specialists who do it, to the marketing people who actually activate your actual marketing activities. So, here's an example is, who you're actually speaking to. So if you're an in-house and you're looking at your CMOs, what is it that they actually care about? And step 2 would be the insights that align with that. So, if they're looking for online sales, what are the insights you can gain from your e-commerce performance? And then how frequently you actually are analyzing that information, how often you need to kind of be agile with those KPIs. And lastly, what technology that do you require to make those calls and gain those insights? And lastly is really making sure that you have the right people and the right skills in-house to make those decisions. So making sure you have the right data partners, making sure you have the right analysts, making sure you have the right people to activate and optimize and gain insights moving forward. because this is when it's more important than ever to making sure you're partnered correctly today to really kind of prepare yourself for next year. And there is a cool tool that you can look at. So it's the digital maturity benchmark online. So it does cover quite a lot of different points within a business, and it is just a questionnaire of multiple choice. But it does kind of benchmark where you sit today. So here's an example of, this particular business got 2.4 out of 4, where it's really about, they are using third party and first party audiences and those kind of things. So if you are heavy on the third party, this is obviously a really important time for you to really try to shift the way that you are working today. And this is a quick and easy way to kind of identify, I guess, how vulnerable you are to the changes coming up. So my key takeaways is make sure that you're preparing internal stakeholders. It's kind of like the Apple iOS update where we expect the results to change. We expect the campaigns to not perform as well as they may have before from a reporting perspective and those kind of things. It's really preparing the people that we are speaking to internally that is going to happen. It is inevitable moving forwards, and kind of explaining to them that the ways that we can help mitigate and reduce the impact is really about making sure that you do have the right tech stack established internally. You do have strategies to kind of merge your data and your marketing platforms. And then once you have all that, it is about that first party data. So collecting your databases, collecting as much information as you can, because not only will it provide you insights today, but you can utilize it moving forward. And then the key thing would be making sure that if you are collecting this first party data, is to make sure it is protected. There are some pretty heavy lawsuits out there if you are not doing it, and making sure you have the right processes and protocol in place to do that. And then making sure that you are providing value for consumers. So not even from an information collection perspective, but what you're doing with that. Like I mentioned before, 81% of people don't think that they're seeing the benefit isn't high enough, and the value for giving their information to people. So we really need to change the way that we are providing those benefits and we are providing those values to users so that we can collect that information moving forward. And that is everything. So thank you very much. Obviously, if you have any questions moving forwards, you can see here how to get in touch with us. And hopefully we hear from you soon. Bye.